The wine had barely touched his lips when Joffrey Baratheon staggered, gasping and clutching his throat. Chaos erupted around the royal wedding table. But fate, or perhaps the maester's intervention, proved swifter than the poison. A quick-witted Pycelle had rushed to the king's side, forcing down a concoction he always carried for courtly emergencies. It wasn't perfect. It left the boy king weak and shaken. But Joffrey survived. Cersei's scream had barely faded before she was demanding arrests. Tyrion was still accused, the goblet still found in his hands, but the urgency of a dead king was gone. Instead, the Lannisters had a humiliated, half-paralyzed king on their hands, one whose voice cracked with rage, but whose commands held less weight than they once did. Margaery Tyrell, once poised to become Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, now found herself married to a king whose rule had been challenged and whose strength had been diminished. The Tyrells were uneasy. Olenna, sharp-eyed and shrewd, knew something had gone wrong. Her carefully planned assassination had failed. She hadn't counted on Pycelle, and now the boy she called Monster still sat the throne. His paranoia heightened. Suspicion festered like rot beneath the banners and flowers of King's Landing. Joffrey's recovery was slow, and during his convalescence, Cersei tightened her grip on the court, spinning tales of Tyrell treachery. She whispered of ambition cloaked in silken smiles. Tyrion, meanwhile, rotted in the dungeons. The attempted murder of the king was too grave to ignore, even though his accusers were unsure whether to carry out execution or use him as leverage. Jaime's pleas for reason fell on deaf ears, both in Cersei's chambers and the small council. Yet the people of King's Landing had seen Joffrey's cruelty. His survival did little to win them over. They whispered that perhaps death would have been a mercy. But Joffrey, wounded pride and all, returned to court in a rage. His voice hoarse, his limbs unsteady, he vowed to show strength. His first act, to oversee Tyrion's trial personally. He demanded a public spectacle, one grand enough to wash away his humiliation. Witnesses were summoned, lies bought with gold. Fear and Sansa Stark, vanished into the night, became the ghost everyone blamed. In the Red Keep, Varys watched silently. The poison had failed, but the chaos it sowed had only begun. He counseled restraint, but restraint was not in Joffrey's nature. Humiliated before the realm and physically weakened, he struck out viciously at anyone who challenged him, starting with the Tyrells. He accused Margaery of complicity, nullified their wedding, and sent her back to Highgarden with a barely veiled threat. Olenna Tyrell returned to the Reach in silence, but her mind burned with vengeance. She had tried to rid the world of a mad king. Now the Mad King knew someone had tried. That spring, black banners flew at the edge of the Reach. The Tyrells began gathering strength, not overt rebellion, but not loyalty either. The Iron Throne had a king unworthy of power, and the realm began to stir with unrest. In the north, Rose Bolton seized Winterfell. In the Riverlands, the Freys boasted of their victory. But their power waned in the face of the Blackfish's guerrilla resistance. Daenerys Targaryen, across the sea, had begun her rule in Meereen, but news of a weakened king in Westeros gave her council a new reason to whisper of ships and dragons. Back in King's Landing, Joffrey stood before Tyrion, with venom in his eyes. "Confess," he growled, voice cracked and thin. "Confess, and I'll grant you a quick death." Tyrion looked around the hall. Sycophants, cowards, shadows of men. "I saved your life once," he said. "I should have let you die." The hall went silent, and Joffrey, jaw trembling, pointed. "Execution," he spat. "No trial, no mercy." Cersei hesitated, but she saw the danger too. Letting her brother live might cost them the throne. Tyrion was dragged from the courtroom. Varys vanished from court the next day. And in the cells below the Red Keep, a plan began to stir. A plan to rescue a Lannister who had once stood alone against the tide of madness. The king had lived, but the realm had begun to rot. Darkness cloaked the Red Keep the night Tyrion Lannister escaped his cell. Jaime, tormented by guilt and love, had made the decision. Varys, ever the spider, provided the passage and the silence. But this time the escape bore a different weight. Tyrion was not broken by loss, but driven by vengeance. He refused to see Tywin on the privy, refused to stain his hands with that blood. Instead, he slipped away into the night, bound for Pentos and far from the wildfire madness of King's Landing. When dawn broke, the city woke to blood. The guards who failed to prevent Tyrion's escape were found hanged. Joffrey paced the throne room like a caged lion, lashing out at his council. Cersei tried to calm him, but his bitterness at being weakened and nearly killed had hollowed him. His voice was still thin and raspy, but his words struck like knives. "Everyone who betrays me," he said, eyes flashing, "will pay." With Margaery sent away, Joffrey demanded a new queen. Petyr Baelish, ever the opportunist, whispered of a Vale alliance. Young Sansa Stark, he said, was being held by traitors. He could recover her. Joffrey snarled at the mention of her name, but agreed. "Let her return," he said, "and let her kneel before the throne that spared her husband. Let her suffer, as he had." Meanwhile, in the east, Tyrion arrived in Pentos under Illyrio's protection. The man who once schemed for Viserys Targaryen now had another pawn, an angry, brilliant exile who knew Westeros better than any noble still living. Tyrion drank, brooded, but also listened. He heard of Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons, of a young queen who conquered cities and broke chains. He laughed bitterly when they asked if he'd serve her. "I've served monsters," he said. "What's one more?" Back in the capital, the streets murmured with unrest. The High Septon, emboldened by the people's discontent, preached openly against royal corruption. Joffrey responded with brutality. Sparrows were hunted, septs desecrated, and the Sept of Baelor swarmed with gold-cloaked guards. Cersei, once the architect of power, found herself clashing more and more with her son. He dismissed her council, rejected the small council's restraint, and filled his court with flatterers and sadists. Qyburn rose in prominence, whispering promises of monstrous creations in the dark. Jaime saw it all, helpless. He had given up his honor to save his brother, and now that brother was gone. He watched as Joffrey slipped deeper into madness, tormented by dreams, paranoid that Tyrion would return. He struck servants for imagined insults. He had his food tasted 3 times over. When a serving boy stumbled and spilled wine on his robe, Joffrey ordered his tongue removed. Even the Lannister bannermen began to question their loyalty. Many had followed Tywin, not the boy king who now ruled alone. In the Reach, Olenna Tyrell set her plans anew. She wrote letters, ships sailed, gold changed hands. She knew her failure, had cost them dearly, but she was not done. The Queen of Thorns had thorns yet. And in Dorne, Prince Doran Martell listened to the winds of change. The Lannisters had insulted his house. He had stayed patient. But with news of Joffrey's reign growing darker, he summoned his niece, Arianne, and his most trusted knight. It was time to stir the fire. In the north, Jon Snow had risen to become Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Letters from the south spoke of a mad king reborn. He remembered Joffrey's face, twisted with cruelty, and felt only cold resolve. Winter was coming, and the man on the Iron Throne would be no ally when the true enemy arrived. Far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood in her pyramid, dragons restless, her rule in Meereen unsteady. But her eyes turned westward. Her advisors spoke of a broken king, of a realm crumbling under its own rot. Tyrion Lannister's name reached her ears, a dwarf with wit and rage. Perhaps he would be the key. In King's Landing, Joffrey stood before the Iron Throne, dressed in black and gold. He had lived through poison. He had buried traitors. He had crushed defiance. But his crown sat heavier each day, and the shadows around him grew darker. The throne he once ruled through fear now answered to no one, not even him. The Iron Throne loomed like a twisted monument behind Joffrey as he held court, his thin voice echoing through the marble halls. But where once the lords bent the knee with false smiles, now they came with guarded eyes. The realm could sense. This was not strength. It was desperation wrapped in golden lions. The boy who had tormented beggars and knights alike was now a king struggling to command obedience. Lord Tyrell refused to return to court. From Highgarden, messages came thin and formal, with just enough courtesy to avoid treason. Joffrey interpreted it as insult. He ordered their grain taxed, their soldiers blocked from marching past the Blackwater. But the realm needed the Reach's food and gold. Starving small folk muttered in the alleys of Flea Bottom, and even the gold cloaks were hard-pressed to silence them all. Cersei attempted to calm her son, but Joffrey was no longer the brat she could steer. The poison had sharpened his malice, and added a new edge: paranoia. He began refusing to eat unless meals were tasted by 3 different men. He had Pycelle replaced with Qyburn, who promised strange new protections brewed in the dark corners of the castle. Rumors whispered of experiments beneath the dungeons, screams at night, and bones burned without record. In the Vale, Peter Baelish spun his web. Sansa Stark, now under his protection, was remade in silence. She dyed her hair, wore gowns of dark blue, and listened to his lessons on power. Joffrey still rules, Littlefinger told her. But every mad king carves his own tombstone. We just have to guide the chisel. Sansa listened, nodded, and waited. She no longer dreamed of heroes, only of choices. Tyrion, meanwhile, journeyed eastward. Illyrio had delivered him to a new cause, and the dwarf, half drunk and angry, was taken aboard a ship bound for Meereen. He did not believe in queens or saviors, but he knew one thing: Westeros was breaking. And broken things could be remade by clever hands. In the Riverlands, the Blackfish led skirmishes against the Freys. Arya Stark, presumed dead, trained in the shadows of Braavos. House after house began to stir, no longer for loyalty, but for survival. Even the Lannister bannermen looked west and north and asked, "How long will this boy last?" Joffrey's madness grew. He ordered a statue of himself erected beside the Sept of Baelor, depicting his survival from the poison, with himself strangling a snake that wore a crown. When the statue was defaced one morning, he burned a dozen beggars alive in the streets. Jaime watched it happen, face grim. His golden hand gleamed, useless. He began to spend more time with Brienne, speaking of oaths, of choices, of what kind of man he wanted to be. But Kingsguard or not, he could not stop his son. Qyburn approached Joffrey one night with a gift, a man taller than any knight, wrapped in black armor and never speaking. Sir Robert Strong, he called him. The people whispered it was Gregor Clegane, returned from the dead. Joffrey laughed when he saw him and named him his new bodyguard. "Let them come for me again," he said. "I'll show them what death looks like." Meanwhile, word spread across Westeros of ships gathering in the east. Daenerys, breaker of chains, was consolidating her rule. When Tyrion arrived in her court, bruised and sunburnt, he dropped to one knee, not out of fealty, but calculation. "I can give you the throne," he said, "because the fool who wears the crown now is tearing it apart." In Dorne, Doran Martell finally moved. A raven flew north to Sunspear, bearing words for the sand snakes. "The lion cub lives, and his claws grow longer. It is time." Back in the capital, wildfire stockpiles were growing again. Secret orders, signed by Joffrey himself. The Mad King had burned from fear. Joffrey planned to burn from spite. The boy who had once screamed at a butcher's son in the streets now stood surrounded by steel and shadows. But his kingdom bled at the edges, and storm clouds rolled in from the east. Across the sea, in the throne room of Meereen, Tyrion Lannister stood before Daenerys Targaryen, his mind already racing. He had expected fire and fury, perhaps a queen, as mad as the kings he had known. Instead, he found calm steel behind violet eyes. She listened more than she spoke. She questioned his motives, his past, his failures. He did not lie. I drank. I killed. I ran. And I learned, he said. But I know Westeros. I know how it thinks. And I know your enemies. One of them is my nephew. Daenerys allowed him to stay. She did not trust him, but she recognized value where others saw ruin. And as Tyrion began to understand her counsel, her armies, and her dragons, he began to believe something he had long abandoned: hope. The Seven Kingdoms don't need a better king, he said to her one night. They need a different kind of ruler, one who inspires fear and love, and one who isn't Joffrey Baratheon. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Joffrey was spiraling. The surviving nobles no longer brought him gifts, only excuses. The small council met in secret more often than in the open. Even Cersei had begun using Qyburn's spies to track her own allies. Jaime drifted further from the Red Keep, riding out often with Ser Loras or Brienne to inspect the roads. The king grows restless, he said grimly, and the city tightens like a noose. The people were starving. Gold from the Reach had stopped flowing. Merchants were taxed to the bone. When one dared protest during court, Joffrey had him. Flayed and left hanging in the plaza. The stench lasted for days. Riots broke out in the outer districts. The Gold Cloaks responded with blades, but they could not silence hunger. And in the Vale, Peter Baelish moved Sansa Stark like a piece on his private board. He declared her his ward, claimed protection of House Arryn, and quietly opened his gates to traveling knights and hedgelords. The king is no longer feared, he told them. He is hated, and hatred is fragile. Sansa listened to him by day, but at night she stood alone on the cliffs above the Eyrie, thinking of wolves and snow. Olenna Tyrell, back in Highgarden, called her bannermen to muster. Under the guise of protecting the Reach from banditry, she sent emissaries to Dorne. She sent letters to old friends in the Stormlands. Quietly, steadily, she laid the pieces for a second attempt. This time not poison, but fire. In Dorne, the Sand Snakes rallied behind Nymeria. They trained, plotted, and whispered to the merchants who passed through Sunspear. The lion is wounded. The viper has yet to strike. In the north, Stannis Baratheon marched on Winterfell. And though the cold bit hard and his men thinned, his cause burned with the fire of Melisandre's prophecy. She had seen the boy king in her flames, wearing a crown and drowning in green fire. She urged Stannis forward. Let Winterfell fall. Let the false kings burn. Only one can stand against the darkness. At court, Joffrey heard news of ships, massing in Slaver's Bay. The first reports of a dragon attacking a convoy reached the capital. Joffrey flew into a rage. More stories to frighten children, he screamed. Let them come. I'll mount that beast's head above my throne. But deep down he was afraid. His dreams were haunted, of Tyrion's smirk, of choking on blood, of dragons tearing open the sky. He began speaking of destiny, of gods punishing him and needing appeasement. When a group of Septons tried to calm him, he burned their temple and replaced them with Qyburn's chosen zealots, men loyal only to the king and his silent knight. By the time spring thawed the Riverlands, the crown had lost control over half the realm. River Run flew the Tully banner once again. The Brotherhood without banners harried the roads. In the west, even Kevin Lannister began questioning Joffrey's rule. He sent a private message to Casterly Rock. The Lion has lost his mind, and far away, in Meereen, Tyrion raised a goblet to the news of dragons flying again. "Let the boy scream," he said. He played at kingship. Now the real game begins. Spring crept across Westeros, but the warmth brought no peace. Whispers of war echoed through castles and keeps, and the name Joffrey Baratheon was spoken less like a king's and more like a warning. In King's Landing, the Red Keep had become a fortress of fear. Joffrey rarely left its walls, surrounded always by Sir Robert Strong and a rotating wall of guards. His eyes twitched at shadows. He ordered entire wings of the castle sealed, suspecting ghosts or traitors behind every door. Cersei watched her son unravel. She had fought tooth and nail to keep him alive, to place him on the throne, to crush his enemies. But she had not expected him to turn on everyone. When he ordered a raid on the Tyrell wine cellars, accusing them of poisoning the city's supply, Cersei tried to reason with him. He screamed at her in court, accusing her of wanting Tommen to replace him. "Everyone wants me dead," he shouted, his voice cracking into madness. "Even you, mother!" The small council shrank to a shadow of its former self. Grand Master Pycelle was gone. Kevin Lannister had resigned. Lord Mace Tyrell had stopped attending altogether. Only Qyburn remained, whispering dark science and darker promises. "Let them fear you," he said. "Let fear make you immortal." In the east, Daenerys prepared to leave Meereen. Tyrion had proven his worth, navigating politics with a sharp tongue and sharper mind. He counseled her to abandon Slaver's Bay. "You're not meant to rule cities built on rot," he said. "You're meant to break them. Westeros needs breaking." Ships gathered in Astapor. The unsullied sharpened spears, and above them all, Drogon's sword, his wings blotting the sun. When Daenerys mounted him before her people, it became legend. In the taverns of Westeros, rumors began to spread. The Dragon Queen comes. In the north, Winterfell burned. Stannis Baratheon took the castle at great cost, but he raised his banners over the ramparts and declared himself rightful king. Melisandre's flames showed her visions of dragons and shadow. "One king must fall," she told Stannis. "One must burn, and one must rise from ash." Sansa Stark, far away in the Vale, watched these fires from her perch in the Eyrie. Pater Baelish taught her to read the winds of power. She had learned patience, silence, and calculation. When news of Stannis's victory reached them, she smiled, faintly. "The North remembers," she whispered to herself. At Dragonstone, Aegon Targaryen, young Griff, landed under the banner of House Blackfyre, claiming to be the true son of Rhaegar Targaryen. With him were Golden Company soldiers, Westerosi in blood, if not in loyalty. They met no resistance. Lords discontent with Joffrey's reign began swearing fealty to the dragon reborn. Back in the capital, the tension snapped. A group of gold cloaks tried to desert. Joffrey had them burned alive in the dragon pit. That same night, a riot broke out near the docks. Half the city was set aflame before dawn. Cersei ordered Sir Robert Strong to restore order. Instead, he slaughtered dozens indiscriminately. The people began calling him the King's Butcher. Jaime could take no more. One night, he came to his sister's chambers and said, "He is no longer your son. He is Aerys, reborn." Cersei slapped him, tears in her eyes. "He is all I have left," she whispered, but she knew he was right. The next morning, a raven flew from the Red Keep to River Run. The message bore the Lannister seal, but not from the king. It was from Jaime. If there is to be a future, it must be without Joffrey. In Meereen, Daenerys raised her banners. With Tyrion by her side, she began the long voyage west. "I will not come as a conqueror," she told him. "I will come as a storm." In Dorne, the Martells and Tyrells met in secret. Unthinkable once, but necessity made allies of old rivals. "We tried poison," Olenna said. "Next time, we try fire." And in King's Landing, Joffrey stared into the flames of his private hearth. He had begun speaking to them, whispering to them. "They'll see," he muttered. "They'll all see. I was meant to rule. I survived the poison. I am the dragon." But no one answered him. The docks of Meereen heaved with activity as Daenerys Targaryen set sail at last. Her fleet stretched across the bay like a great banner of vengeance. Tyrion stood beside her, sea wind tugging his hair, watching dragons circle overhead. He had once dreamed of ruling from the shadows in King's Landing. Now he dreamed of returning, not as a fugitive, but as an architect of reckoning. "Westeros has forgotten what true power looks like," he said. "Let's remind them." In Westeros, that reminder had already begun to take shape. Aegon Targaryen, young and bold, had taken Storm's End in a campaign that caught even seasoned lords off guard. The Golden Company marched behind him, disciplined and tireless. "I will not be my father's shadow," he declared. "I am the Storm reborn." Lords in the Stormlands rallied to him, disillusioned with the chaos in King's Landing. They remembered Rhaegar, and Aegon's calm voice echoed the prince they had once believed in. Ravens flew to Highgarden and Sunspear. The Tyrells sent gold, the Martells sent steel. The enemy of their enemy had returned, wearing the Targaryen name, like a sword. And somewhere in the east, another dragon queen approached. In King's Landing, Joffrey's rule teetered. He had taken to locking himself in the throne room for hours, sometimes days, ranting to the Iron Throne as if it whispered secrets. "They're coming for me," he hissed. "Let them come. I'll drown them all in wildfire." Cersei grew, pale. Jaime, now openly opposed to his son, warned the remaining loyal bannermen. "If he lights even one cask of wildfire, it won't just be the end of our enemies, it'll be the end of us all." Yet no one dared remove him. The faith militant, once suppressed, now regained influence in the shadows. Sparrows moved among the poor, preaching of divine justice. When one openly cursed the king in the great sept and was flayed alive, even the faith's silence turned cold. "The gods will not suffer this boy," the High Sparrow said. "He is a shadow of Eris, and fire will answer fire." In the Riverlands, the Blackfish captured Harrenhal with guerrilla tactics. From there, ravens flew north, south, and east, calling banners, forging quiet alliances. War was coming. Everyone knew it now. In the Vale, Sansa Stark, still Elaine in name, walked the quiet halls of the Eyrie. Peter Baelish spoke of marriage alliances, of waiting for the realm to break so they could seize what remained. But Sansa was changing. When word of Aegon's victories reached them, she said, "A dragon must face a wolf before the game ends." Her eyes were no longer soft. The girl who had once sown in silence now watched the realm like a hawk from the mountains. Jon Snow, in the north, had faced winter and fire alike. When he heard of Stannis' capture of Winterfell and Joffrey's madness, he sent no ravens. He prepared. "Whatever game they play in the south," he said, "the dead play a different one." And far beyond the wall, something old stirred. Joffrey summoned Qyburn to the throne room in the dead of night. "Build me more of him," he commanded, gesturing to Sir Robert Strong. "A dozen. No, 100. They will be my King's Guard. They will never sleep, never betray, never fail." Qyburn hesitated. "Such creations require time, and more material than the city can—" "Take what you need," Joffrey snarled. "Take prisoners, take corpses. I don't care." The court watched in silence as bodies began disappearing from the dungeons, the streets, even the septs. Screams echoed from beneath the Red Keep, muffled but unceasing. Jaime made his decision. That night, he entered the king's chambers. Joffrey was alone, muttering to a goblet of wine. "Do you know what happens when they all turn against you?" he asked, without looking up. "You turn into fire, you burn them, you make them watch." "You've burned enough," Jaime said. "It ends now." But Joffrey stood defiant. "You can't kill me. I'm your son." "You're not," Jaime whispered. "You're a disease that bears my face." As he drew his sword, Cersei entered behind him, pale, shaking, but silent. She did not stop him. But Qyburn did. "Sir, Robert." Strong burst through the chamber door, blade drawn. Jaime and the monster clashed in a blur of steel and rage. Jaime fought like a lion, but the thing beneath the armor had no mercy. When it finally dropped him to the floor, blood spilling from his gut, Joffrey leaned over him. "I win," he whispered. "I always win." Cersei turned and walked away. The next morning, bells rang in the city. The official report: Ser Jaime had died defending the king from assassins. But the city knew better. And across the sea, Daenerys sailed ever closer, her dragons waking in the storm. The sea winds howled as Daenerys Targaryen's fleet reached the shores of Westeros. Black sails bearing the three-headed dragon unfurled above the waves. Beside her stood Tyrion, clad not as a Lannister, but as her hand, his golden brooch fastened, like a promise of vengeance. Behind them flew Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, screeching into the dawn sky. The Dragon Queen had come not as a conqueror of cities, but as the reclaimer of a birthright. They landed first at Dragonstone. It welcomed her like a daughter returning from exile. From there, ravens flew in every direction. "Bend the knee," her letters read, "and be part of a new realm. Resist and be forgotten by history." The Stormlands rallied first. House Bar-Emmon, House Fell, and others tired of war bent their knees to Aegon. But upon learning of Daenerys' return, many hedged their loyalties. Westeros was facing not one Targaryen, but two. The realm stood on the edge of a storm it had not seen since Robert's rebellion. In King's Landing, Joffrey's madness now ruled unchecked. With Jaime dead, Cersei shattered. She locked herself away in Maegor's holdfast, emerging only for appearances, her once razor-sharp voice dulled by despair. The nobles whispered of her broken state, of a queen who had once commanded the court, but now trembled like the poorest beggar. Qyburn's monsters multiplied. Sir Robert Strong was no longer alone. Two more silent knights stood beside him at all hours, flesh sown, blood enchanted, identities erased. The city feared them more than Joffrey. Executions became daily rituals. Hunger spread like rot. Even the gold cloaks rebelled in secret, their loyalties now bought with Reach gold or turned by whispers of the Dragon Queen. Tyrion's network in the capital, once dormant, flared back to life. Spies sent word of wildfire caches, of Joffrey's delusions, of Qyburn's grotesque experiments. "He's not ruling," Tyrion told Daenerys. "He's unraveling. The Iron Throne is not just empty, it's cursed." In the Reach, Olenna Tyrell committed. She sent her army to join Daenerys. The Dornish did the same. House Tarly, despite its loyalty to the crown, split in two. Randall Tarly remained cold and unmoved, but his younger son Samwell, now a brother of the Night's Watch, had sent word, south. "The dead come from beyond the wall," he warned, "and the boy king wastes the realm's strength chasing ghosts." At Winterfell, Stannis still held the north in a bitter, half-frozen grip. When word reached him of Daenerys' dragons, he stared into the fire and said only, "The hour of choosing is at hand." In the east, Aegon Targaryen, furious at being overshadowed, marched west from Storm's End. He sent an envoy to Daenerys, offering alliance and demanding her dragon stand behind him. "I am the true-born son of Rhaegar," he wrote. "You are his sister. Let us rule together or face each other." Daenerys held the letter in silence, then handed it to Tyrion. "Do you believe he is Rhaegar's son?" she asked. Tyrion shook his head. "I believe he's a pawn, polished well. But you are the fire the realm remembers." That night, she ordered her army to march toward King's Landing. The city braced itself. Joffrey ordered every gate sealed, every pot of wildfire checked and readied. He had barrels placed beneath the sept of Baelor, under the city's walls, and even in the crypts. "If I fall," he told Qyburn, "they all fall with me." The small folk began to flee. Thousands rushed the gates, only to be turned away or cut down. Inside the walls, starvation turned to madness. The streets reeked of smoke and blood. The Mad King's prophecy, "Burn them all," was no longer a distant memory. It lived again in the mouth of his grandson. One night, from the ramparts of the Red Keep, Joffrey stared into the flames of Blackwater Bay and whispered to himself, "I am the dragon. I am king. I am death." When Daenerys' army reached the capital, they did not charge. They waited. The dragons circled the skies. Tyrion approached the gates under a banner of truce. "There is still a chance," he said, addressing the defenders. "A chance to live, a chance to turn away." The gates did not open, but that night a section of the walls exploded. From the inside, half the gold cloaks mutinied. The gates were opened, and the army of Daenerys Targaryen poured into the city. The sack of King's Landing was swift and decisive, but the throne was not yet won. Joffrey had vanished into the Red Keep, and beneath it, the wildfire waited. Smoke coiled through the streets of King's Landing as Daenerys Targaryen entered the city astride Drogon. The gates had fallen, the gold cloaks had surrendered, and the people, what remained of them, watched from alleyways and broken windows, too stunned to cheer, too starved to resist. Her army marched beneath black and red banners, flanked by unsullied Dothraki and Reach Knights bearing roses and vengeance. The Mad King's daughter had come not as a tyrant, but as deliverance. But the city was not yet hers. The Red Keep still stood untouched, and Joffrey Baratheon, last of the Lannister kings, had vanished into its shadows. Tyrion led Daenerys through the shattered outer courtyard, his heart pounding with each step toward the throne room. "He won't surrender," Tyrion said. "He never learned how." In the depths of the castle, Qyburn's creations stalked the halls, silent, rotting, knights with unnatural strength. The Unsullied fought them with spear and flame, clearing each corridor, inch by inch. Varys's birds, once dormant, had reawakened, feeding information to Tyrion. The throne room had been rigged. Wildfire caches lay beneath it, hidden even from the Queen's scouts. "If he lights them," Tyrion told Daenerys, "he'll destroy the Red Keep, the city, and you." Daenerys looked up at the looming tower, eyes burning. "Then we end it before he can." They made their way to Maegor's Holdfast, where Qyburn had sealed himself in with Joffrey. Sir Robert Strong stood guard outside, silent, unmoving. When Grey Worm ordered him to stand down, the monster lunged. What followed was not a fight, but a massacre. It took 3 unsullied spears and Drogon's fire to bring the thing down. Inside, they found Qyburn dying, coughing blood, spine twisted, from a collapsed wall. "He's waiting," he gasped. "He thinks the fire will make him a god." Daenerys entered the ruined throne room alone. The Iron Throne stood jagged in the dim light, warped by the battle and years of lies. and in front of it stood Joffrey, gaunt and trembling, his crown askew, fingers wrapped around a blackened lever built into the stone floor. "You came," he said, voice dry and cracked. "You think you've won?" Daenerys said nothing. Her boots echoed on the scorched marble. "I survived poison! Betrayal! The gods chose me!" he screamed. "I am king! This throne is mine!" His hand moved to the lever, and then Tyrion stepped from the shadows. "Hello, nephew," he said softly. Joffrey froze. Tyrion looked at him, this boy who had once held his fate in a cup of wine and a cruel smile. "You're not the king. You were never the king. You were a tantrum in a crown." "I'll kill us all," Joffrey hissed. "No, you won't," Tyrion said, "because for all your madness, you're still a coward." Daenerys stepped forward, Drogon's shadow sweeping. Overhead, "I should have died at that wedding," Joffrey muttered. "It would have made sense. Instead, I lived, and every day since has been punishment," Daenerys finished for him. "The gods don't choose kings, Joffrey. People do." He lunged for the lever. Drogon crashed through the ruined roof. The blast of fire lit the throne room in green and gold and red, swallowing Joffrey where he stood. The blast erupted, but Daenerys and Tyrion were shielded by the dragon's wings and stone columns. The Iron Throne melted, twisted beyond form, scorched into molten slag. Silence fell. The reign of Joffrey Baratheon had ended not with a coronation, but with a scream and fire, and nothing left behind but ash. Days later, the city began to rebuild. Daenerys declared the end of dynastic monarchy. A council of lords and ladies was summoned, north, south, east, and west, to begin forging a new realm. Tyrion stood beside her, no longer hand of the king, but hand of a queen who had no throne. Sansa arrived from the Vale, regal and cold. Gendry Baratheon came from Storm's End. Samwell Tarly, Lord Commander now, sent ravens from the wall. The realm, broken and bloodied, stood at a crossroads. In the north, Jon Snow prepared for the winter to come, and in the ruins of the Red Keep, where the Iron Throne once stood, flowers began to grow. The boy who lived, who ruled with terror, had fallen at last.